Today, we're going to dive into one of the most chilling chapters in South African history, the case of Moses Sithole. This was a predator who absolutely terrorized a nation, and his story ends with a prison sentence so unbelievably long, it's hard to even wrap your head around. Just look at that, 2,410 years. Let that sink in for a second. That's not just a prison term, it's a massive statement from a society trying to deal with a level of brutality that is just immense. But who was the man behind a number like that? So this is him, Moses Sithole. To people around him, he actually seemed pretty mild-mannered. He even claimed to run a charity for young people. But behind that facade was a cold, calculating predator who orchestrated a terrifying spree of violence across the country. His crimes eventually became known as the ABC murders. It's a chillingly simple name that literally maps out the geographic spread of his attacks across South Africa's Gauteng province. So why the ABC killer? Well, it's because of the path his terror took. The whole spree started in Atteridgeville, then it moved to Boksburg, and finally ended in Cleveland, a suburb of Johannesburg. It was this methodical, horrifying expansion of his hunting ground. The fear was real, and it spread way beyond just those three communities. The panic got so widespread that it demanded a response from the very top. We're talking President Nelson Mandela himself, visiting Boksburg to ask for the public's help. That just shows you how deeply these crimes shook the newly democratic South Africa. So to even begin to understand how someone could do these things, you kind of have to look at where he came from. A really troubled childhood that set the stage for his first serious run-in with the law. His early life was really just defined by tragedy and instability. He was born in 1964, lost his father at age 5, and then was abandoned by his mother. After spending years in an orphanage, a conviction for rape landed him in prison, an experience he would later, crazily enough, blame for the horrific crimes he went on to commit. So how did he operate? Let's break down the deceptive methods Sithole used and, importantly, acknowledge the many, many victims he left in his wake. His method was just built on this cruel, twisted deception. He preyed on the hopes of women who were looking for work, pretending to be a businessman with jobs at his completely fake charity, Youth Against Human Abuse. Think about that name. He would lure them to these secluded spots for an interview, and that's where he would attack. And the pace of his spree was just terrifying. This all happened in just 16 months. From his first attack in July 1994, the violence just escalated and escalated, creating this climate of intense fear that finally ended with his last murder in November 1995, right before they caught him. The human cost was absolutely staggering. In total, he was convicted for the murders of at least 38 people. The vast majority were women. But so tragically, the list also includes a 2-year-old boy who died from exposure after Sithole just left him at a crime scene. And the tragedy just gets deeper with this fact. While 30 of his victims were eventually identified, 8 of them never were. They remain nameless to this day, a heartbreaking detail that just underscores the true devastation this man caused. So, as the body count just kept rising, the pressure to find this killer became immense. The manhunt for Moses Sithole was on, and it was going to end in a really gripping and violent confrontation. And then, in this shocking turn of events, Sithole himself explained his motive. He actually contacted a journalist and claimed the murders were revenge for what he called his unjust imprisonment on that earlier rape charge. He told her the women he killed reminded him of those who had falsely accused him. The way they caught him was incredibly dramatic. After calling that journalist, Sithole proved who he was by revealing the location of a victim's body. The authorities traced that call and ambushed him. But even when he was cornered, he didn't surrender. No, he attacked an officer with a hatchet before he was shot and finally captured. With Sithole in custody, the case moved to the courts. And what came out of that trial was a historic sentence, designed to make absolutely sure he could never, ever threaten society again. The whole court case led to this sentencing breakdown. On December 5th, 1997, he was found guilty. And get this, for each of the 38 murders, he got 50 years. For the 40 counts of rape, 12 years each. And for 6 robberies, another 5 years each. And here's the crucial part. The judge ordered the sentences to run one after the other, consecutively. Which brings us right back to where we started. When you add all those consecutive sentences up, you get to that final staggering total, an effective sentence of 2,410 years in prison. And just to remove any tiny sliver of doubt about his fate, the judge, Justice David Kurlowis, made it crystal clear. He said that Sithole would have to serve a minimum of 930 years before he could even be considered for parole. That's basically a life sentence many, many times over. The judge also noted that if capital punishment were still on the table, Sithole would have been sentenced to death, no question. So Sithole is behind bars for good, but the story doesn't really end there, does it? It leaves us with this really profound and difficult question. When you look back at his early life, the abandonment, the trauma, you're kind of forced to ask, how can a society address the root causes of violence and stop the creation of another figure like Moses Sithole?